Palestinian consensus was shattered by the Oslo charade, Edward Said said no to autonomy. Edward said no to apartheid. He said no to the Bantustans, no to normalization with Israel. He said yes to peace with justice. He said yes to equal rights, yes to equal citizenship, yes to an honorable peace. And an honorable peace is not the same thing as the peace of the brave, as you probably know. Edward Said is a unique person who really needs no introduction, but I will introduce him anyway. He is a unique person who has made his mark in numerous fields and across disciplines. An internationally renowned literary and cultural critic, a philosopher of history, a music critic, a Middle East specialist, a political theorist, an activist, and a voice of humane conscience. He's also a husband, a father, and a treasured friend of AAUG. Rarely do we meet somebody with such diversity of talents, devotion to principles and just causes, boundless energy, intellectual resources, analytical prowess, and elegance. Why else would his writings appear in 26 different languages in so many countries around the world, in the most prestigious and widely read periodicals, newspapers, and scholarly journals in North America, in Europe, and also in the Middle East? He has 17 books, more than 240 articles, at least 40 endowed lectures in the past 20 years. He served as visiting professor at many universities, including Harvard, Yale, and Johns Hopkins, and has been a fellow at numerous centers of learning and advanced study in North America and Europe. At Columbia, where he has been for more than 3 decades, he holds the rank of university professor, the highest academic rank awarded by any institution of higher learning. I don't know where he finds the time, but he also chairs the doctoral program in comparative literature at Columbia. He is the general editor of a book series at Harvard University Press entitled Convergences, Inventories of the Present. He also writes a regular music column for The Nation. He has 2 books scheduled for publication in 1998, Authority and Transgression in Opera, The Empson Lectures by Cambridge University Press, and also Reflections on Exile and Other Essays, Harvard University Press. Ladies and gentlemen, it is this rich diversity and groundbreaking contributions debated all over the world which give Edward Said his unique character. He can be very political and unpolitical. You see the intermix of politics, culture, psychology, and the arts in his various works, whether it is Orientalism, culture and imperialism, After the Last Sky, representations of the intellectual coloring Islam, and others. Perhaps a major contribution of his is where he shows how the justification of empire building was embedded in the Western cultural imagination during the age of empire, and how even today the imperial legacy colors relations between the West and the formerly colonized world at all levels. The notion that all cultures are interdependent, hence the West and its former subjects must recognize that the true human community is global, also testifies to the genius of Edward Said, the political and the non-political. One of his former students, by the name of Frank Motley, who is now an assistant dean at Iowa University School of Law, described him quite accurately in the following sentence, and I quote. He said, "I suspect that Mozart had the same kind of intelligence, gift, and passion as Edward." Meeting
an organization with which I've been associated almost from the beginning of its life, and especially to see good friends like Louise and Tia and others, Vaughn, Sonia, and Awa, on the same podium with me. I'm going to take advantage of your patience and talk in a kind of personal way for a while, because I think the occasion warrants it, for reasons that you already know some of. That is to say, yesterday was my birthday, and there's something about that I want to comment on. Also because this is a unique year for our anniversary. It's not only the 80th anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, which was issued in 1917, as you know, on November the 2nd. It's also the 100th anniversary of the Basel First Zionist Congress at Basel, Switzerland, 1897, and the 50th anniversary of the UN Partition Resolution. There's a fourth sort of anniversary of this. That is, at the end of 1947, my family and I, we were principally living in Egypt, but the rest of my family, my cousins and aunts and uncles, grandparents, and so on, were living in Palestine. And 1947 was the last year that we were in Palestine, and we left at the end of the year. So actually, just about now, a month later, say, we left Palestine for the last time in December of 1947. Let me begin by saying something about the Balfour Declaration, and that is that over the last couple of weeks I've had the opportunity to reread the classic Zionist account of the Balfour Declaration by Leonard Stein, book that came out in 1961. And one of the two or three things about the book, with an enormous amount of detail that impressed me, are the following. First of all, although the Zionist leadership varied in terms of where they wanted to put the national home of the Jews, as I say, it is true, an opportunity, they thought, to place it in East Africa. There was a scheme to plant the Zionist flag on the outskirts, rather on the borders of southern Palestine at Al-Arish, and this was an agreement they were trying to reach with the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at the time. There was a scheme to settle Jews in South America. So although those goals varied, once they settled on Palestine, the collective goal remained the same. And that's very impressive. As I say, one of the things that one notices in our own history is changing in collective goals. It's very hard to maintain a collective goal in the Arab world, but we shift around with results that have always been bad. The second very important aspect of it is that they were very interested not in infiltrating Palestine, but were looking to open the territory for settlement by Jews with a blanket approval secured, as Herzl and Weizmann was later to say, secured by public law. They began with the notion, therefore, that the most important thing that they needed was a public law internationally and, of course, nationally recognized, in this case by the great imperial power of Great Britain, to establish a national homeland for the Jews. And they stopped that until, as Stein says in his book, for about 20 years they maneuvered until they got the Balfour Declaration on November the 2nd, 1947. The third point that is striking about it is that one of the main arguments they used, and Stein is quite, who is a Zionist, is quite open about this, and it's worth remembering. Part of the argument they made to the British and to anyone whose ear they could get was that the Jews were powerful, they were well connected, and most important, it was useful to befriend them. That's to say, they offered advantages to their prospective patrons that made them attractive to them. A lot of this is summarized in a statement made by Weizmann at the Zionist Congress of 1921, and I'd like to read it to you. He says, "The strength of our national will forged for itself two main roads for its goals: the gradual extension and strengthening of our Yishuv in Palestine, the settlement of Palestine, and the spreading of the Zionist idea throughout the length and breadth of Jewry." That's to say, it's important to constantly build. One of his other mottos was another acre, another goat. Constantly adding, building, accumulating in Palestine. And at the same time, no less important, was the spread of the idea. As to say, the idea is as important as what you do on the ground, and that the two can never be separated. And I think this is one of the great differences between Zionism and its pursuit of a national homeland in Palestine for the Jews and the Arab goal, which is always varied between having either no ideas or several ideas at the same time, and losing sight of the collective goal, if there is one, and attempting to convince people of the importance of the idea. I've always contended, and I will certainly be talking about this today, I've always contended that there is, in fact, an idea of Palestine that deserves an equal, coexistent right in Palestine, historically, but that it hasn't been served well, neither by people nor by the leaders. And at this particularly mournful time, it may be worthwhile to reflect on the reasons for that, and not only the reasons for it, but the ample evidence that exists. Now, what I would like to do before going on with my reflections on this subject is because one of the things that impresses you when you read accounts of the Balfour Declaration and the whole early history of Zionism is that how little was being done on the other side. Weizmann, for example, according to Stein in his book, had more than 2,000 interviews with members of the British government during the 4 or 5 years leading up to the Balfour Declaration. There was a kind of constant appearance, pressure, organizational focus, which didn't exist at all on the other side. We were, relatively speaking, outside of the picture. For all kinds of reasons, no use lamenting. But what I thought might be interesting for you, a book that I am in fact publishing before the other two that I'll see referred to, which is a memoir. I thought it might be, if you'll allow me, kind of relevant to read to you from this memoir of mine around the period of the 47-48 period. This will give you an idea. These are the recollections of a 12-year-old boy, what it was like then, and how different it was from the well-organized, extremely disciplined, modern, and aware consciousness of the Zionist movement that was in fact preparing to take over the country. As I said, I'll read you bits and pieces here, but I thought it was interesting evidence. My parents, sisters, and I spent most of 1947 in Palestine, which we left for the very last time in December of that year. My Aunt Nabiha was my father's sister. She was a widow and lived in Jerusalem. My Aunt Nabiha, they were our closest family. They were driven out of Jerusalem in stages, so that by the early spring of 1948, only my oldest cousin, Yusuf, had remained, having abandoned the Talbiya house where I was born, because the whole quarter had fallen to the Haganah, and he had moved to a small apartment in Upper Ba'a, an adjoining district in West Jerusalem. He left even that last foothold in March, also never to return. My distinct recollection of Talbi, Atamon, Upper and Lower. Atamon is now where Nathan Sharansky lives. It's quite extraordinary how Arab identity is forgotten. But these were the sections of West Jerusalem, Talbi, Atamon, Upper and Lower Ba'a. My recollections from those early days until we left definitively was that they seemed to be populated exclusively by Palestinians, most of whom my family knew and whose names still ring familiarly in my ears. I saw none of the newly resident Jewish immigrants, except elsewhere in West Jerusalem, So that references today to West Jerusalem always first connote the Arab veterans of my childhood. It's still hard for me to accept the fact that the very quarters of the city in which I was born, lived and felt at home in, were overlain by Polish, German, and American immigrants who conquered the city and have made it the unique symbol of their sovereignty, with not even an arguable place in Palestinian life, the eastern city, with which I had much less acquaintance. West Jerusalem was conquered, of course, and has now become entirely Jewish, its former inhabitants expelled pretty much by the middle of 1948. In those days, the Jerusalem I and my family frequented was a good deal smaller, simpler, more superficially orderly than Cairo, where we also lived. The British were the holders of the Palestine Mandate, which they terminated suddenly in 1948, about 6 months after we had left. There were British soldiers everywhere. Most of those had disappeared from Cairo at that time. And that strange general impression I retained was of an extremely English place, of neat houses, disciplined traffic, and a great deal of tea drinking. A place whose residents were, in the case of my family and its friends, that was English-educated Arabs. I had no idea at all of what the mandate was, or what the Palestine government, whose name featured on currency stamps and the like, really was either. Compared to Cairo, Jerusalem was a cooler place, where the grandeur and wealth of opulent houses, expensive shops, big cars, large noisy crowd that surrounded us in Cairo were totally missing. Jerusalem, however, seemed like a homogeneous place in which mainly Palestinians lived, although I do recall brief glimpses of Orthodox Jews, and I think one visit to or very near Nisharim, where I felt a combination of curiosity and distance without assimilating or understanding the starkly different presence of the black-suited, hatted, and coated Orthodox Jews. On November 1st of 1947, my birthday, I recall with a twinge the, to me, puzzling vehemence with which my oldest cousins bewailed the day, the eve of the Balfour Declaration, the blackest day in our history. I've always associated the Balfour Declaration in some way with my birthday, as if it was my fault. I had no idea what they were referring to at the time, nor as best as I can remember was I informed. Perhaps they or my parents who were there sitting around the table with a birthday cake assumed that I shouldn't be informed about something so wounding and complex as our conflict with Zionists and the British. But I also divined at the time the subject was an overwhelming one, and that I would be unable to go into it too much. Though, of course, because of my birthday, I had an association with it anyway. Certainly, the signs of impending crisis were all around us. The city was divided into zones maintained by British Army and police checkpoints, through which cars, pedestrians, and cyclists had to pass. The adults in my family all carried passes marked with a zone or zones for which they were valid. My father and my oldest cousins had multi-zone passes, A, B, C, D, because of their importance and seniority, I thought. The rest were restricted to one or perhaps two zones in Jerusalem. Until I turned 12 in November, I did not need a pass, and this allowed me to wander about freely with my two younger cousins, who had them for two zones. So grave and sober a city was Jerusalem, so tense were the politics of the time, as well as the religious competition between Christians, Jews, and Muslims, as well as between Christian communities, that informed my early years. And I remember those last months there as particularly flat, circumscribed, repetitious. My Aunt Nabiha once gave us a big scolding for going to a Jewish cinema. Why not stick to the Arab cinemas? Isn't the Rex good enough? She asked rather shrilly. After all, they don't come to our cinema. And even though we were sorely tempted to go back to the region, which is the Arab cinema, we never did so again. My class at St. George's, which is the school I went to and my father and grandfather went to, my class was pretty homogeneous, its majority divided equally between Christians and Muslims, boarders and day students. Michael Mamnura, who taught mathematics, belonged to that world, very soon to be dissolved and uprooted in the cataclysms of 1948. He was a gentle and extremely intelligent teacher who, despite his nervousness at being a family friend of most of the students, the son of the cathedral dean who had baptized me, taught us with considerable skill the rudiments of fractions. I remember seeing him in 1951 with my family in Madison, Wisconsin, then again while he was a graduate student at Princeton, I a freshman, then again on several visits to Toronto where he now lives. The pathos of his shattered past seems never to have left him, as it also stamped so many of my family's friends and relatives. The rest of St. George's academic offering made no mark on me. It was a combination of indifferent teaching, volatile atmosphere, and as I look back on it 50 years later, a general sense of purposeless routine trying to maintain itself as the country's identity was undergoing irrevocable change. When I turned 12, I immediately acquired a pass just to go to school. Nervous British Tommies at the barbed wire barricade peered into my satchel. My pass was examined suspiciously, and already too tall and developed to look like my age, I felt looked at with unfriendly foreign eyes as a possible source of trouble. Since the pass my family got me from some mysterious government office was restricted to the area where St. George's was located, I experienced an already small city as made even smaller. My aunt's family had a light green Studebaker to which my younger cousins were given access. The three of us fooled around Talbibi. I'd be dropping in and out of their friends' houses with occasional extra rides taken with them. I rode a bicycle around the little square just west of the house. 2 blocks up the hill behind the house, the British Army Bugle Corps would rehearse in the unyielding midday sun. On weekends, I remember crouching behind the rocks to look at them, transfixed by their shouted, unintelligible cries at each other, their large black pleated boots pounding on the black asphalt, almost melting in the heat, their weirdly savage bugle calls emitting sounds that grip the air if we're not quite music. Only one boy in my class has remained clearly in my memory, David Ezra. I think the only Jew, there were several in the school, in my class, primary 7. The only boy from that period whose memory still grips and puzzles me in light of the subsequent changes in my life in Palestine. He was a strongly built, dark-haired person with whom I conversed in English. I also recall him as standing somewhat apart from the rest of the class, more self-sufficient, less transparent, less connected than anyone else. All that attracted me to him. Although he didn't resemble the Levantine Jews I knew in Cairo, I also had very little idea what he meant, except that I recall distinctly not feeling anything peculiar about his presence among us. He was an excellent athlete. During the lunchtime football games, as well as during Mr. Matout's raucous gymnastic classes, he impressed me with his powerful shoulders and thighs as well as his aggressive play. One thing he and I never did was to walk away together from school after classes were over in the afternoon. Small groups did that, perhaps as a way of traversing checkpoints in the security of numbers. I think the last time I saw Ezra, he was standing at the top of the road looking in my direction, while 3 or 4 of us ambled off together towards Talbibi. When my family suddenly determined just before Christmas that we had better return to Cairo, my ruptured connection to Ezra soon came to symbolize both the unbridgeable gap, repressed for want of words or concepts to discuss it, between Palestinian Arabs and Jews, and the terrible silence forced on our joint history from that moment on. What overcomes me now is the scale of dislocation in family and friends, to which I was a scarcely conscious, essentially unknowing witness in 1948, a boy of 12 and a half, thereafter in Cairo, seeing the sadness and destitution and the phases and lives of people I had formerly known as ordinary middle-class beings in their country, Palestine, at the same time unable to comprehend the tragedy that had befallen them. What actually took place I could never piece together as a whole, from the numerous narrative fragments recited before me and from the people I actually saw intermittently without adequate context from then on. Yusuf, my older cousin, he had a twin sister called Eileen. One spoke passionately at our Cairo dinner table about her faith in Kawalchi, a name that meant nothing to me when I first heard it. Kawalchi will come in and rout them, she said with great force. Although my father, to whom I returned for information, described the man with some skepticism and even disrespect as, quote, an Arab general. Aunt Namiha's mode was often plaintive and scandalized soon after she appeared in Cairo. When she described the horrors of Deir Yassin, say, naked girls taken through their camps on the backs of trucks, I assumed she was expressing not the horror.
I'm Mark Bruzonsky, your host for this weekly program, Mideast Realities, and thank you for watching. If you too are concerned about the situation in today's Middle East and about U.S. policies toward that crucial region of the world, and if you'd like to meet like-minded persons, Why don't you come to one of our weekly social meetings? I'll be there, of course. Just give us a call for details.